Welcome back to a new episode of the Computational Antitrust podcast. My name is Thibault Schrepel. I am a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center, an associate professor of law at the VU Amsterdam, and the creator of the Computational Antitrust project, which explores how legal informatics can benefit antitrust law. The project brings together over 70 competition agencies and about 50 academics on the advisory board. Every month or so, we publish an academic article on the subject of computational antitrust. You can find all of these publications in open access at computationalantitrust.com. Today's guest is Natalie Harsdorf. Natalie is the head of the Austrian Competition Agency. She also chairs the OECD Working Party on Competition and Regulation. She is teaching European law at the University of Vienna. And finally, she has a PhD in procedural competition law. In today's conversation, Natalie and I discuss her priorities as the head of the Austrian Competition Agency, with a special focus on the role computational antitrust plays in the agency's strategy and daily operations. We also cover how international cooperation in antitrust is evolving and explore what the future might hold for competition policy. On a more personal note, we talk about trail running and other lighter topics. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Natalie, thank you so very much for joining me on the podcast. Before we start, I must say that Theodora could not join us because she just arrived in the US for a postdoc at Stanford, and it would have been 2:30 a.m. And unfortunately, she could not make it to that late in the night. So it's going to be the two of us, but I prepared all of the questions with her, and she'll be back in the forthcoming episodes. What I've done is that I've divided the conversation in two different parts. First, I want to talk about your priorities and where you're coming from and your objective and how you see competition law. And then we can talk about the more concrete way to apply computational antitrust and what you've been doing, what you want to do. But maybe even before all that, a quick story. We met about a year ago at a dinner organized by the Dutch Competition Agency in the context of a big conference on the DMA. And what I quickly realized is that you have one of those watches. And so I asked you the question about whether you were running or swimming. And so I think that's the first thing we ever talked about, even before talking about competition law. And I guess my question is, do you think that somehow it has an influence on your professional work?
For me, my vision as a leader is being very active, developing ideas with my team, also inspiring them to give their best and to put their heart into their work. And for that, you need to have a lot of energy. So your personal energy level needs to be high, because then you can inspire other people. And for me, a way to reload my batteries is definitely sports, if possible, outdoor sports. And I used to do other sports, but now I'm very much into endurance running. So I'm training for a trail running marathon in Switzerland. That will be my first full trail running marathon. So I'm very excited. And it's something that gives me a lot of course, it's a competition with yourself in a way, because I have my own goals. But then, of course, also in marathons, you run with other people. And so it's also a group exercise. You need a lot of resilience for that kind of sport. And resilience is also something you need as a competition enforcer, because complex cartel cases or antitrust cases takes a lot of time to build the evidence. You need a long breath before the court sometimes. And even in our advocacy work, sometimes you need a lot of patience and dedication. I think there's some common ground between my free time sport and my job. But in general, it's just sun and fresh air and not thinking too much about anything else. It's meditational for me. I think it's important in general for people that work in high pressure jobs that they find some kind of balance that makes them also emotionally more balanced. Because as a leader, as a manager, I think it's really important that you manage to always communicate in a very respectful way, that you establish a good relationship with your staff, And it's never a good advice to be too fast in your judgment. And for that, I think it's good to have some hobbies or some balance and have something else besides your core work.
So today in our discussion, we're going to talk about trade-offs, and I have one more about running. Are you experiencing sometimes trade-offs in terms of I'm training for a marathon in the mountain, which takes a lot of energy to the point where it may impact your energy level? Because I could see how if you train a tiny bit, then you are more energized. But
Mhm.
training also for marathons, not in the mountain, already I can see sometimes in the morning, I'm tired, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
How are you balancing all of that?
Yeah, the biggest challenge for me is actually regenerating because a professional runner, of course, they can just sleep for a day more or less or take time to prepare your food. And I don't have that. So I have to adapt my training to that. And I have to say, of course, it leads a bit to having other areas. I would say I try to limit going out in the evening and to limit cultural events to weekends because during the week I really need to get to bed at some point to really get my energy back, also physical energy, because as you say, running can be exhausting. So I think also there you need to put some planning effort into that because you're not a professional runner. You have business trips. I fly to Brussels, I fly to DC, I have to go to Paris, I have dinners. That's exhausting. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So you can manage the two, but maybe at the expense of some other things, such as going out.
exactly. Instead of going to the opera, maybe you will go to bed at 9:30 p.m. Yeah, it's always in life, there are always trade-offs.
So one more question about where you're coming from, but
Mhm.
moving on to more of the professional
Yeah.
realm. Your legal education was completed in various jurisdictions belonging to different legal cultures. And my question is whether you saw different approaches to competition law, and if you think this is something that is now part of your approach to the field.
Yeah, I did my studies in Vienna and in Dublin and in Belgium and Bruges. In Dublin, I had a professor, Dermot Cahill. He taught more or less US antitrust law. I had a completely different focus than in Vienna or in Bruges because in Bruges I had a French teacher. And so I got different perspectives on antitrust law. And I think that has been very helpful for me. My PhD then I did on procedural competition law that again gave me a different perspective because it was more about rights of defense, fundamental rights, like a different dimension. And that's also this part. Procedural law is also a very important part of our work at the agency, especially since we follow a prosecutorial model. So a lot of our work is doing litigation before the courts, and there you need to know your procedural law, right? So lots of I sit down with my teams, we discuss litigation strategies. That really has helped me also in my job that I have this very good basis, not only substantive law, but also in procedural law. I have kept a bit of a contact with the academic world. So I used to work at the University of Vienna and I'm working for the University of Vienna. I'm teaching European law and competition law. I'm examining on European law. It's an oral exam at the University of Vienna. And I've kept this academic hat. I find that very helpful because as an enforcer, you deal with day to day, like real cases, but sometimes it's good to take a step back. What are the principles behind that? Like you have to take a different perspective. And I really enjoy discussing some more, having deeper discussions with my students and also get their insights and not only talk about a real case where you also have different considerations. You think, what's the chance that we win this case in court? How can we prove the infringement? But you tend to think a bit less about general principles and why we're doing this and where we're going, right?
Yeah. And talking about taking a step back, you've been the head of the Austrian Antitrust Competition Agency since 2021. What were your priorities at the time when you first took the lead of the agency, and are those priorities the same today?
I've been working for the agency for quite some time of my career. I've had different roles in the agency since 2009. And when I took over first as interim head and then as head, my priority was restructuring the agency, building up personnel, negotiating, convincing the government to give us more budget, and building a stronger institution. That was my main priority. And fortunately, with the help of past government and the parliament, which plays an important role in our system, this has been possible. Like, I've been able to create more leadership positions in the agency. This has helped us with quality management and increasing the speed in our procedures, which I think is a very important aspect of fairness. So that was one priority. The other priority for me was doing more advocacy, explaining to the public what we do and making the agency a bit more tangible, because we are a very efficient enforcer, and maybe showing our results a bit better. That also makes sure that you get more support from policymakers for getting a good framework for enforcement. So that was the first priority. And then later I started also to change a bit the priorities. What kind of cases we tried to build. A very important area where we had not been very active was fighting abuse of dominance. And especially in a small jurisdiction, we have a powerful economy in Austria. We have a strong industry base, but still it's a small jurisdiction with a lot of SMEs. A lot of abuse of dominance can occur and can be extremely harmful for innovation and competitiveness of our country. This has been now a focus, and we brought 3 different abuse cases to court. One is still pending, and the 2 other fines were imposed. This will continue as a priority from my side. We have had a track record already the past 10 years of being very effective in detecting cartels and pursuing cartels. My priority was just to speed up our proceedings, to bring cases faster to court, and we've managed that. Last but not least, in mergers. Merger control was introduced in Austria only in 2006. So you can imagine that we do have markets that are already highly concentrated, and all the more it's important that now we are very vigilant in merger control. Last year, in 7 cases, we negotiated remedies, some of them at the stage of court proceedings, some in phase 1. Some of them included substantial divestments. In 2 cases, the commitments were going in the direction that we build the ground that a new competitor can enter the market. I think those 2 cases will be very interesting to maybe later in 2 years do an ex post analysis and see, did it work? But our first impression is that these cases are going really well. In merger control, be vigilant and really target the remedies in an effective way for markets to work better. That has also been a priority. And then sector inquiries have informed policymakers about the possible need for regulation or deregulation in Austria. There has been a lot of public attention on our sector inquiries. In this area, my priority was to be a bit quicker and make sure that the recommendations we issue can be actually transposed into legislation, either regulation or deregulation, right? That has also been a focus.
So somehow it almost feels like your original priorities, and you talked about speed and efficiency a lot, were informed by your PhD, looking at procedural antitrust and fairness. That brings you to institutions and how they work, and slowly you have shifted that while keeping the focus on cases and substantial issues. Now, how important has the digitalization of the agency been in the process of speeding up enforcement and making it more complete?
That has been at the heart of also transforming the agency. I created an AI department. Our processes internally have been completely digitalized. That process already started before the COVID pandemic, and that really helped us. So I think the Austrian authority was one of the authorities that made the speediest transformation of their when COVID hit, because we already had a digital setup. So we didn't start at zero. But of course, in that area, you always have to invest. Apart from, let's say, the cost for personnel and rent, this is really the biggest chunk of our budget goes into investing in digital tools, in digital infrastructure, projects where we try to develop new tools. And what I always find interesting in this area is that actually, when we think about digital, we always think about computers and digital devices and servers and whatever. The most important starting point is that you get a very good human team, right? That deals with this area of the institution. And I negotiated with the ministry that we can hire IT experts, and they are in a different kind of salary scheme than the regular civil servants, like the personnel working in legal or economists. And so we are competitive, yeah, with the private sector. We just hired, we're now in the process of hiring 2 more people for our AI team, and we got almost 50 applications that were relevant. And I think that's a very good sign that we are competitive here as an authority with the private sector. And I think the human resources are the starting point for any digital transformation and for really advancing in that area.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We actually had a similar take given by Martijn Snoep, the head of the Dutch competition agency, in which he was saying that they are not struggling actually to acquire and attract talents to the agency. So that's the building of the capacity for the agency to indeed then move into computational antitrust. Now, the other side of the coin is for what purposes? And that brings me to ask the question about the goal or goals of competition policy, because you may have all the tools and the expertise you want. You need to know what's the direction you are moving into. I'm wondering here, what's the stance of the agency, if that is clearly defined? And how do you think that it actually shapes the tools and the expertise that you are trying to acquire?
We live in a world that is constantly evolving and changing, but I think the purpose of competition law has remained the same and is still valid. Now, when I get to sit on panels, I just was on a panel where I was asked, how do you deal with this new era in antitrust where the focus is on increasing competitiveness? And I was like, I don't know, since the first moment I started studying competition antitrust law, it was clear that this is a very important area to ensure competitiveness of an economy. So what's new about it? I don't really get it. It's nothing new. Maybe it's new to communicate it in a stronger way, or when enforcers really try to show how what they do has a positive impact on competitiveness. But if you look, for example, at the Austrian history, for decades we didn't have a modern competition law, and that was identified by the OECD, by our really very well-renowned economists that we have had in Austria and economic think tanks for decades. They were saying, if Austria wants to be more competitive, you need to introduce a modern competition law, right? So the interlink has always been there. But I think it's good, and I think in that way, maybe that debate that is ongoing sends a good message to authorities. Is our task is also to, for example, when we do a merger case, to very well explain why we think there is a competition issue, how what we do will serve the overall economy. So I think in that way, we can always try to do a better job. But I think this underlying goal, it's good if it's an integral part of the DNA of the agency. I think you always have this sort of 2 sides of the coin. We're trying to help shape competitive markets and help create the frame so that companies can be successful and competitive and innovative. And with antitrust law, we also make sure that there's a trickle down effect to the consumer. So it's an important instrument to reduce poverty and create more equality. So these are, like, I think both are the big goals that we work towards. And I think in the history of competition law enforcement, you can see there's always a slight shift if you focus more on putting more emphasis on the positive effects on the consumers, or if you put more emphasis on the positive effects of the overall economy and the competitiveness of companies. So that really always depends a bit on the political climate, but they're always there. And antitrust law enforcement has both those effects, no matter where you put the emphasis in communication.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned the trickle down effects. You also, in a previous answer, mentioned ex post assessments when talking about merger cases. Do you feel that computational tools are helping you come up with the data and documents the effect of what you do? Is that something you've been using in the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the biggest challenge is with the legal part of my staff, right? To work with new tools. But most of my economists have a very solid understanding of computational issues, and they work very closely with forensics and AI department. And they really interact in a very good way. We wouldn't have been able to do sector inquiries so quickly, to analyze data the way we did, if it wasn't for new tools that we use and for using the innovation that we see on the markets.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. And that will be a bridge to part two of our conversation on the concrete use cases and how you've been using computational antitrust. I have a question that is twofold. Since you've been heading the agency, did you confront with any case where the use of computational tools has been a game changer, where you can confidently say, this has enabled us to bring the case, to document the practice, to better understand the practice? And conversely, looking back at a couple of the cases you had in the past, can you now say, if only we had the capacity we have today, the outcome would have been different, most likely?
Mm, I think definitely with any big case where we conducted dawn raids and we seized a lot of data, like we did in the huge construction cartel, where if you put the data we took on those dawn raids into paper at some point, we tried to find a comparison. I don't know if it's scientific, but my team came up with a comparison that the data we took, if you transform it into paper, it will be 3 times the Congress Library of the US. And I think that shows that how much staff would I need to go through those stacks of paper. And they're clearly using forensics and self-learning AI tools that can go through the data, that learns patterns and can identify evidence that is helpful in the investigations, and it really speeds up the investigations. So I would say that those cases, and now we're more advanced than we used to be at the time, the analysis of data that you see during dawn raids, that's really a game changer. But there are also other small helpful developments. For example, if you do an interview or an interrogation, we used to have somebody in the room that needs to type what the witness is saying, and then maybe it's not exact because then you have to show it to the witness and ask, is it what you've said? No, I don't think, I think I said something else. And okay, even if if you record it, you have the possibility that anything that's being said is just immediately transcribed. That saves so much time and energy. So it's also these small changes that help you. Of course, in other areas, I'm on an, let's say, intellectual level. Yeah, I'm maybe a little bit concerned. Even when I talk to my students, I'm thinking like, I hope they still really learn how to come up yourself with the structure for a speech, or with, I don't know, be able to write yourself a poem. Because of course, that is the other side, that with these tools, you can type in, write me a speech that is innovative and funny and blah, blah, blah. And then are you still able to do that yourself? Yeah, that's maybe on a broader level. So my students sit in very difficult exams where they have to, without any digital tools, write an essay and develop their own ideas. Because I think you need to still train the humans and train the human brain, that you can still do some things yourself. And even if you get help, that you're still steering the ship, so to say. Yeah. So I think we'll have to find a balance there.
You need to be able to at least assess what AI is giving you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you may have all the humans in the loop that you want. If the human is just taking all of the information that AI is giving that human without the ability to assess whether this is good or bad, then AI can be transparent, explainable. It wouldn't change much, right? We would take everything by default.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think also what you touch upon is like decision making. Yeah. Some people ask AI, is it a good idea to do this and that? And then, of course, the AI gives you some probabilities of what's a good idea and so on. But decision making, the capability to do decision making, I think it's something that we need to preserve and not hand out everything.
Yeah. And so it comes from the fact that AI and Gen AI especially can be used across industries, across tasks. And you've made the point very clearly that you are using it, or you would have been able to use it for down rates, regardless of the type of industry. It could be not necessarily digital, those analog industries. Now, when it comes to the more tech part of antitrust, are you relying on computational tools when it comes to abuses of dominance, going after large tech companies? Is that where you're also utilizing technology?
We also, when we do sector analysis, of course, we apply econometric tools where we use computational tools like to calculate price effects. We use data mining instruments to detect certain patterns and so on. So I think there are lots of different areas. If you're mentioning possible proceedings against the big tech companies, here, of course, I have to put emphasis on the fact that the Commission is the sole enforcer of the DMA. We just got a new government recently, and one of the things that I proposed for this next legislative period is transposing into Austrian law that we can support the Commission in the DMA enforcement and giving us a good legal basis that when we investigate and then we see a DMA issue, that this can be used in their proceedings. I think that there will be a legislative change. It's in the government program, and I think that will be important. But still, the big cases against big tech will be dealt with at the Commission level, and that's good because it ensures coherent enforcement. It makes sure that one agency builds up all the expertise and resources for that special area of enforcement. So I think that's good. On the other hand, of course, it puts all the pressure on the European Commission, whereas in other areas of enforcement in the antitrust world, when we look the way Regulation 1/2003 is set up, I think it provides a very good checks and balances system also for that there is no under-enforcement. Because if I don't bring an abuse of dominance case that has a European dimension, maybe the Commission does, or the French colleagues do, or the Spanish colleagues do. In a way, it's also very good. It ensures that even if one enforcer is maybe not capable of bringing that case or doesn't have that as a priority, it's a European competition network, and that network works in a way that different countries, different authorities can bring a case, unless it's a completely regional case, of course. But in a way, I think it provides also a lot of safeguards against interference from politics, because it's very unlikely that all agencies face the same kind of pressure at the same time. Because usually within the European Union, you have different parties in power and there are different views and different things. So in a way, I think it also safeguards independence of competition law enforcement. Whereas, of course, with the Digital Markets Act, it's all on the Commission, and we have their back in a way. We try to support them. I'm in the high-level group. My experts are in some of the working groups. But in a way, of course, they have to fight their fights on their own.
Yeah, it makes it for a single point of failure, or at least a single point you can attack, and we've seen that already. But how do you foresee that new prerogatives being put in place? Would you invest in trying to detect potential infringements of the DMA that you could report to the Commission? Or would it be that in the context of your work, if you see something that is DMA relevant, then you'll send it to the Commission, but without doing more?
If I look at the landscape of the Austrian economy, none of the big tech companies have their seat in Austria, but I see a lot of companies that can benefit from the positive regulation of the DMA. And I think some of them have not realized yet what they can achieve for their own business models with the DMA. I think we talk so much about over-regulation these days, and like it has a negative connotation. But I think there are some regulations at the European level that can be really used very well for making business and creating your own business. I see that also as part of the role of the agency, that we take a very close look if any companies face difficulties with their business models and if these problems can be tackled under the DMA, especially since, as I said, Austria is a country of SMEs. They probably don't have these huge legal teams and might not even be aware what possibilities they have under the DMA. So we'll certainly be the screening body at the national level for possible infringement of the DMA.
So let's talk about those international collaboration. You have a new, very important role at the OECD. Congratulations. I want to put that on the record. I think that's very good news for all of us. And in the past, your agency has also worked with many other agencies and published reports, such as the one with the German Competition Agency and others. How do you see the political landscape having an influence on the international cooperation, or at least maybe just the one with the ECN, so within Europe?
Yeah, an authority competition authority works extremely closely to all markets, and markets are affected by geopolitics. If we think about energy markets or food markets, some markets are affected a bit less by geopolitics than others. But of course, if we want to tackle market failure, we also have to take into account what parts of market failure are maybe not due to a problem in competition, but maybe are due because here we have war in Europe and this has an effect. I think that is very clear. So on the one hand, market realities, right? Also, of course, tariffs can play into how markets evolve. So if we see internationally tariffs imposed, those have an effect on economies and we have to work with market realities. That's very clear. That doesn't change, of course, that thankfully over centuries we have developed this very important framework, which is called rule of law, and which makes sure that institutions like a competition authority, which has powers, we have very strong tools, and these are handed to us by the democratically elected representatives. They are handed to us by the legislator with a very clear mandate that's in the law, right? I don't have the right as the head of agency to act outside of my legal mandate, right? And my legal mandate clearly does not involve making political assessments. Yes, take into account market realities, but I'm not a policymaker and I'm not a politician. I think this is something that has to be very clear, and especially in the Austrian legal setup, where I think this has been safeguarded very much by the fact that we have this purely prosecutorial model where I bring cases to court. So my basic question is, will jurisprudence follow my theory of harm? And so, yeah, we can set priorities. We have to have a vision how we develop the agency, but it's not my job to make politics based on geopolitical developments. I treat companies equally, no matter which jurisdiction they come from. It's not in my mandate not to do. On the contrary, it's a basic principle of our constitution to treat similar facts equally, right? So I think that is very important. My last point is that, of course, as a public institution, we can play a role in building up international cooperation. We can be part of the country strategy on international cooperation in Ukraine in last October, on a mission that was organized by our foreign ministry. I'm supporting the Ukrainian Competition Authority in their preparation for Chapter 8 on competition in the accession process, because Austria supports Ukraine and because Austria supports them preparing for this process. And of course, in this area, also an independent institution such as the Competition Authority can be part and play a role in the country strategy. That's something else.
Yeah.
And of course, as part in my role in the OECD, it's very clear that also I have to take a very bipartisan look at all issues, because as chair of Working Party 2, I'm chairing, I have the chairmanship because all members by consent gave me that mandate, which is a very big honor. And I have to represent all their interests in the chairmanship, and not only the Austrian interests, but all their interests, and act in that role in the way that continually finds consensus with all the members.
Let me ask two final questions on just that point. One about the present, and the last one will be about the future. About the present, you've mentioned the fact that your procedural structure and the fact that you have to bring cases before the court obviously has a big impact on the type of cases you may bring and the way you approach competition policy. How is that impacting the use of computational tools, to come back to our subject? Do you think you would use those tools the same if you were in a position such as DG Comp that can actually make decisions, although they may always be appealed, of course?
I always have the feeling, I don't want to say that other authorities don't do their homework the same way, because of course they do excellent preparation in their cases. But I always feel that in a prosecutorial system, you feel during the whole investigation that pressure that will a judge believe in what I'm writing, because it's not judicial review that we're undergoing. It's really the first assessment of the case. We send the application to court, and then the judge, in his judgment, that's the case decision, right? So the evidence needs to be so good that the judge takes a decision in the way that we think it should be done. So that puts a lot of pressure on us because the judges are not at all involved in our procedure so far. And a judge, an Austrian judge, he will not say, oh, this is a digital market, this is a policy priority, that's an important case for Austrian SMEs. No, because judges don't think that way. They're not trained that way. For a judge, it doesn't matter if it's a case in waste management or if it's a merger case on a specific part of a machine or if it's a digital case, because that's the way judges are trained. So I think in a way it forces us maybe to prepare even better and be super advanced, and anything that helps us in preparing those court cases is of course great. Also, our judges, they have a legal training. And they usually appoint an independent economics expert who will give a completely independent assessment. So they will ask some professor of, a German or French university to look at our case. So it needs to be that good that somebody who is not involved, who has no opinion about priorities, who doesn't think about competitiveness, will think this is a good case, and they are right.
And that's indeed a very different model. Okay, very last question. We talked about the goals of competition policy, the use of tools, the international context. How do you see the Austrian Competition Agency in, let's say, 10 years from now? And I leave it up to you if you want to make it a utopia or dystopia. Where we would be if we are to have a conversation in 2035?
I'm a very optimistic person, not because I'm naive, but because I see the way my brain works. I always see so many opportunities also for our agency to evolve. And I always see possibilities where we can be better or we can create synergies with another institution. And at the moment, my view is that maybe all these challenges that we face in Europe at the moment, I think they provide also incredible opportunities. I feel also within the European Competition Network, but also with my colleagues in UK, in Switzerland, I can feel that there's this spirit at the moment to collaborate even closer somehow. And I think that's very positive. Also, I have a very firm belief in the institutions and networks that we've built in international competition law enforcement. I have a firm belief that the OECD provides a format where we can still work very professionally together, even if maybe parts of our governments have disagreements on other issues with each other. I believe in the OECD Competition Committee. I also believe in the ICN, in the International Competition Network. And I'm optimistic that these institutions will serve us as a bridge builder, even in very challenging times.
I think you have no choice but to have a positive brain when you are stuck on the trail for over 40 kilometers, right? You cannot afford to have those negative thoughts coming your way. So maybe that's a loop with my very first question.
Maybe.
All right. Thank you so very much for everything you've been doing. I'm very excited about you stepping in now with such an important role at the OECD and while keeping your work at the Austrian Competition Agency. So thank you so very much. And
thank you for the inspiring discussion.
To everyone out there, take care of yourself. And if you can, someone else too. Bye-bye.